So, the latest round of high-stakes nuclear talks between the US and Iran, well, it's over, and it ended in a stalemate. After days of really intense negotiations, both sides walked away. So what was the one critical issue that brought the whole thing to a grinding halt? And maybe more importantly, what happens now? Let's break it all down.
Get this. For 21 straight hours, no breaks, diplomats were basically locked in a room in Pakistan just trying to hammer out a deal. The U.S. team even gave a shout-out to their Pakistani hosts for trying to mediate, but you know what? In the end, even that marathon session just wasn't enough to bridge the gap.
And that marathon session ended with this, a pretty blunt announcement from U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. There was no sugarcoating it, no diplomatic spin, just 5 simple words that brought the talks to a very sudden, very public end. And that, right there, set the stage for a much more tense chapter in this whole saga.
Okay, so what was the actual deal breaker? What was the one thing that made it all fall apart? Well, it all came down to a single, non-negotiable demand from the United States, what they were calling their red line.
The key phrase here, the one you need to remember, is affirmative commitment. See, the U.S. wasn't just looking for a temporary pause button on Iran's nuclear program. No, they wanted a public, legally binding, long-term promise that Iran would totally change its nuclear ambitions for good. So what does that affirmative commitment actually look like in practice? Well, it breaks down into 3 key parts. First, an explicit promise: we will not seek a nuclear weapon. Second, and this is a really tricky part, a promise to not even seek the means to build one quickly. That's about dismantling the very infrastructure that could lead to a bomb. And third, and this is the big one, this had to be a permanent commitment, not something that just runs out in a couple of years. For the White House, this was the absolute foundation of any possible deal.
So at that major demand on the table, what was it actually like inside that room? How did the dynamic between the two sides really play out over those 21 hours?
Well, if you listen to the American side, led by Vice President Vance, their team really came ready to make a deal. He stressed that the president had told them to be flexible, to be accommodating on a bunch of key issues.
But, and this is a big but, that flexibility had a hard stop. At the end of the day, the American takeaway was pretty simple. They felt that Iran just wasn't willing to meet them on that fundamental, core issue about their nuclear future.
And look, these talks were about everything. They weren't just in a vacuum. We're talking huge, sensitive topics on the table, including the release of frozen Iranian assets and, as Vance put it, a number of issues beyond that. But apparently, even those massive incentives weren't enough to get a deal across the finish line.
And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some rogue diplomatic mission. The U.S. negotiating team was wired directly to the White House. We're talking something like a dozen calls with the president and his entire national security team over that 21-hour stretch. Every single move was being greenlit from the very top.
So, the face-to-face talks are done. The American team has flown home. So, where do things stand right now? What's the official diplomatic status?
We are now officially in the diplomatic endgame. The U.S. has laid its cards on the table. This is what they're calling their final and best offer. It's basically a take-it-or-leave-it situation now. The ball is completely and totally in Iran's court, and the pressure is on.
And just to be crystal clear here, there are no more talks scheduled. The American side is done negotiating. They've made their final proposal, and now the whole world just waits to see if Iran will take the deal or walk away for good.
All of this leads us to the one massive question that's just hanging over this entire situation. With direct diplomacy now at a dead end, what are the potential consequences? What happens next?
So here's the bottom line, right? After all those hours, after all that effort, the two sides are still worlds apart on the one issue that matters most. The U.S. is demanding a permanent, verifiable promise from Iran to give up its nuclear weapons ambitions for good. And so far, Iran is unwilling to make that commitment. And so we're left with this final and best offer just sitting there, and you can almost hear the clock ticking. With diplomacy off the table, at least for now, the future is incredibly uncertain. The real question is, what is the next move on this global chessboard, and who's going to be the one to make it?